Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Interviews. That's right, it's not just a review, we're now doing an interview this time around. And I am your host and marketing manager, Mackenzie. And today we are joined by a very special guest, someone whose work we've actually already talked about on our reviews, including our review of Christopher Plummer's version of The Tempest and the Stratford Festival production of Twelfth Night, and that is composer and sound designer and musician, Mr. Michael Roth. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Mackenzie. How are you, man?
I'm doing okay. Can't really complain. It's spring here in Toronto, Canada now. We are seeing the buds on the trees popping. Green is there. The smell of spring's in the air. How goes it out your way in California land?
Well, this is Santa Monica, where it's actually 25 blocks from the Pacific Ocean. It's a little bit cold, but that sounds really asinine to say somebody who lives north of the border. So let's pretend I didn't say that. But the ocean does throw a bit of wind 25 blocks where I am, but it's fine.
Well, I mean, Michael, we'll first start off our lovely chat today with our most important question of the day, which is, what is in your cup?
This is a Starbucks plastic cup that I use a lot. So this is cranberry pineapple juice with some carbonated H2O.
Oh, I love that. Well, I'm not as fancy as you. I'm just drinking a cup of Earl Grey tea from my official The Cup cup. But yes, there we go. Yeah, so, but let's kind of dive into a little bit more of you. Like, as I mentioned at the beginning, our whole kind of relationship, our partnership here started because you saw our reviews of Christopher Plummer's Tempest and Twelfth Night. You heard myself and my co-producer Ryan talk about how much we loved your musical compositions. So you were very kind of reached out to us, and then it was just kind of
I'm a very cheap date. No. I mean, actually, it was one of those evenings that I was just, went to YouTube for a second and said, review of Christopher Plummer's in The Tempest at Stratford, and I said, who's that? And as you know, what intrigued me. So and honestly, it's not like I sat there like this, but it was sort of on as I was doing some stuff, and then Ryan started talking about something we'll talk about, which is my underscoring of the section where Gonzalo talks about the ideal utopian society that he would build on that island, right? And how the underscoring kind of even the stakes of the comedy of the scene, and I just said, yes, that's what it did, and that was our intention, and that's a lot of what informed how Des and I would underscore things. I was working with him, so I just appreciated that, and so I just sent a note saying thanks. So here we are.
Yeah, there we go. I mean, but let's kind of dive into a little bit more of you. So let's kind of start with a little bit about yourself. So what drew you to this particular profession as a composer, sound designer, musician, and how exactly did you get to where you are now? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of great people who do write music out there who are like wanting to know how they kind of get to be where you are, where you've worked with a lot of incredible people. So let's just kind of dive in, and you can give us a like tutorial about how to do what you do.
how to get here.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I was kind of a late starter with music, honestly. I mean, I started playing piano when I was around 10 or 11, as opposed to 5 or 6, right? And I did take piano lessons, but really what I did was form a rock and roll band. And when I was like in sixth grade, seventh grade, like early junior high kind of thing. And really, I was just a rock and roller. And the way now in retrospect, the way I divide my kind of the formative years is really I was in rock and roll bands until the Beatles broke up. And the way I look at my own artistic growth, if I have to pick out two moments, and you've probably heard me say this, is that I I can literally remember listening to Sergeant Pepper, and when I was in 7th grade, so that's how old I am, um, and realizing as I was listening to that and having listened to Strawberry Fields Forever, that there was something going on in it that was beyond my reach, right? That it wasn't just a rock and roll band anymore, that they were going somewhere. And I remember listening to it a lot. And I never really recovered from that, you know? And so obviously the Beatles had an enormous influence on me. And I knew, you know, I can talk about Strawberry Fields for an hour if you really want me to, because I think it's that interesting and that seminal. And I knew that living is easy with eyes closed, misunderstanding all you see. I think I know, I mean, I yes, but it's all wrong. That is, I think I disagree. I knew that meant something, but it doesn't actually literally mean exactly what it says it is unless you go there. And that's very interesting to me, especially when I was 13, 14. That was very interesting. Then they broke up, and then I hadn't written any serious music or anything like that, and I really wasn't a theater goer. But then when I was in high school, a English literature class that I wasn't in, I was the hippie editor of my newspaper. But this English class had an extra ticket to go see this play in Greenwich Village, and off Broadway. And I had friends in the class, but I didn't know the play. I didn't know what we were saying. I just said, "Hey, we'll go have dinner. That'll be fantastic." What else do you do when you're 17, right? So I went in and we saw this play that I'm sure we pronounce "Waiting for Godot," but it is actually Godot. I know that now. And I didn't know. I'd never heard of it. Nobody had said anything to me about it. I'd never read any Beckett, God knows. I never went to experimental theater. I went to the Fillmore East. I saw Jimi Hendrix in concert. That's my go-to was that. But then I watched this play where two guys are waiting for some guy to show up, and he doesn't show up, so they just tell each other jokes for 2 acts. And in the middle of it, some other guy shows up, and he says, "Mankind, in spite of the tennis, wastes and pines, wastes and pines, wastes and pines." And that hit me very hard because I, until that night, did not know. I always thought that life was pretty crazy, but I didn't know that art could express that until that night. And that may seem obvious to anybody with any more study prior to that, but I had no study other than, living is easy with eyes closed, right? So, and between that event really turned me into, so what's this theater thing about? And then in my undergraduate years, I acted a bit, but because I was a musician and starting to figure out what composition was, I started composing for theater. And then the first time I was in that room where you are seemingly right now, I'm going to uphold the illusion. Life is an illusion.
Let's keep it up. Yeah.
Yeah, there you are. You must be sitting there. Was in the last production I did as an undergraduate in the University of Michigan, which is not far from Stratford.
No, it isn't.
But in any case, when I was a senior in Michigan, having composed music for plays and things, Nicholas Pennell was a guest artist at the University of Michigan, and he directed As You Like It. And so I did the score. And we had our first meetings at Stratford. So my first time at Stratford was the summer of '75. But in any case, that was I think my first Shakespeare score, and certainly the first one that had songs in it. So that's what kind of got me onto this crazy path. I studied composition with William Bolcom, who some of your listeners might know, who also composed quite a bit for theater. So that's kind of it, and here I am.
I mean, so now that we know kind of your origin story, why don't you kind of give us like a walkthrough of kind of some of the things you've done. Because I mean, like, I know it because I've obviously been on your website and done my homework, but I mean, some listeners may not even realize they've seen or heard some of your work. So kind of, why don't you walk us through a little bit of your, I will happily say, illustrious career of work, where you've kind of done a whole bunch, a plethora of different things. So kind of, after you graduate from Michigan, you do you do As You Like It. You're now out in the world. Kind of give us kind of the highlight reel of what happened to you.
I went back to New York City. So I'm from Long Island. I went to high school with Howard Stern. Does that mean as much to you as it does to America?
Oh, trust me. Oh, yeah. Right. Oh, trust me. We know who Howard Stern is.
Howard Stern and I, he might remember me, but he lived a block away from me when I was in high school.
Wow.
But we never worked together. The bastard. No, we never worked together. Anyway, then, well, basically the summary of the career. So then in New York, I started working, off Broadway and off Broadway, and just doing a lot of experimental things. And basically that led to my meeting Des, and I conducted his musical called The Death of von Richthofen in 1982, right when he was being interviewed for La Jolla Playhouse, which opened in 83. And that was at a time when the idea of coming to California seemed a good thought. Around the same time, I was asked to music direct a review, essentially, of Randy Newman's music. Now, I didn't know his music very well at the time, but I said, sure, it's a job,
Yeah.
And then kind of got into it, and there were certain things that and he'd never given permission for this to happen, but he gave it to this director, Joan Micklin Silver, who just passed away, in fact. And Randy, of course, is a very interesting American artist with very powerful opinions about who we are and how people actually behave. At the same time that he's musically very sophisticated and very studied and all that stuff. So what essentially happened as a result of that was, because the books of his at the time were not terribly good, the songbooks that were published. I called him and said, do you have scores for this? And he said, yeah. And he would send me a few things. And then what I think connected was, he said, so what's going to be in your band? Is it going to be piano, bass, and drums? And I said, no, it's going to be piano, violin, clarinet, and trombone. And he said, well, God bless you. There you go. And I think that I was going to respect the fact that he wrote for orchestra was interesting. So long story short, the second year in La Jolla, he had not been involved in New York for various reasons, but he was very much involved in La Jolla when we did a remount of the show. And that led to us becoming pretty good friends. And it also led to an accomplishment I'm very proud of, which is that the official Randy Newman songbooks that one can buy, there are 5 of them basically, and they're all edited by me. We never talked about that. So that means that when a pianist is that's actually really interesting piano writing in its own funky Ray Charles New Orleans way. And a lot of pianists have a hard time playing it. And when I first sat down next to him and he played what he played, and I would look at the book, I'd say, boy, half of those notes aren't here. And it really did lead to something I'm very proud of, which is that those books are essentially what he plays, give or take a few ad-lib moments. And but they're voiced the way he voices, and it's had a profound influence on me that we've become very good friends. And so what does that mean? That meant that for Randy, I've music directed most of the theatrical presentations of his music that have been a mixed bag, but interesting. And then I also orchestrated his musical he wrote a musical of Faust, a Faust version. Much too much to talk about there, although I'll encourage anybody to try to find recordings of some of the songs, especially Randy's demos, which I think are great. It's been done we premiered it in La Jolla, and then we did it at the Goodman in Chicago, and then 20 years after that, we did a concert of it in New York at Encores. And it's the only time Randy and I have sat at two Steinway Grands and played piano together. Yeah. I mean, you know, for the two of us, it was just really great. And in fact, right as COVID was hitting, we were auditioning for what was going to be the concert premiere of Faust here in LA. And will it happen? Yeah, I think it'll happen, but I think the answer to that is when? You know, I mean, 2020 something, you know.
Sometime within this decade.
Yeah. And that also led to me music directing for Disney, The Princess and the Frog. So etc. Which was a trip, really. I think about this a lot because, you know, I auditioning for an animated feature. So I was with the project for about a year, and I was there for all the auditions. And you know, you've done theater for a while, you know, there's like auditions and then there's callbacks, right?
Yep.
Well, the auditions, and this is a Disney movie, so anybody who can comes in, you know.
Yes.
The auditions are, you know, fine, but everybody basically, you know, reads and records, you know, script, and everything's recorded, and then for the songs, they auditioned with me, and they all got a Randy Newman, one of the songs of his to sing, and I worked with them for a while. Then the callback is essentially they might bring you back to look at you, but basically what they're ultimately going to do is take a picture of the character, a drawing, and without telling you who you're listening to, you listen to somebody and you say, "Is this a match?" Right? And that's it. That's and the answer is vividly clear within about 10 seconds who sounds right with that picture.
Interesting. I didn't know that's how the callbacks worked.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to say that it's vicious, but it just becomes clear what you can work with. So the interesting anecdotal thing with that was I was flown to New York to audition a bunch of people for the lead. And the person that the music department was most excited about was I auditioned Alicia Keys. And she, you know, I don't know, you know, she's pretty good. Yeah. So, you know, I think there's great promise there. So, anyway, and in the coolest hour I've ever spent as a pianist, she'd been given this song the night before or a day before, who knows. And then she came in, and I had, you know, we had an hour together, and she. So I said, you know, let's just go through the song and see what you do, and we went through it, and she was basically like a lot of the actresses did. She was kind of singing all around it, just you know, riffing everywhere,
right?
And you know, she's really good at it. But but that's not really what the song was about.
Yeah.
And so I said to her, that's cool, but I actually think Randy wants it a little bit closer to what's here because the words kind of say that.
It's a musical, yeah.
Right. And also it's already pretty bluesy. It already has that in it. So she sat down next to me, she's a really good musician. And she said, "Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah." She just said, "Yeah, I should just sing that. Oh, it sounds so much better, so much clearer, and all this kind of stuff." She took every single note I gave her, and then we did 2 takes of it, and I believe the one on my website is the second take. Now, it was, and Randy that night, Randy wasn't there. He was doing a gig somewhere, So he said, so how did it go? And I said, it was the coolest hour I've ever spent as a pianist, and she's great. But what was interesting, speaking of the callback thing, is that when she read for it, she's a perfectly good actress.
Yes.
I mean, she's perfectly fine, but her speaking voice is really low, and there's nothing you can do about it. Nope. And so in the callbacks, you'd say, yes, it's like, it's not, she this is not a 16-year-old kid who's going to become a frog, yes. And there's kind of nothing you can do. And Anika, who's perfectly swell, Anika Noni Rose, who was going to be Cleopatra that first year that I was at Stratford.
I was going to play it because I remember Nikki saying that there was a dropout and she had to kind of jump in last minute to play.
Yeah,
so that's who it was going to be. Oh, wow.
It was going to be Anika. And Princess and the Frog was in the middle of happening around then. I'd have to check playing and stuff. Anyway, so Anika ended up doing it, and Anika's great. It's it's just interesting how that works.
Yes.
Anyway, so since then I've done any number of projects with Randy, and he lives 2 miles from here. I value his friendship as much as I can value anything. We talk about all kinds of musical things. We talk about Ives. We talk about musical theater in a way that might make some people upset, and I don't mean to be disparaging of it, but I think anybody who looks at it historically, if Randy had been around in the 30s and 40s, he clearly would have been writing in the musical theater and would have been there with Richard Rodgers.
Yes.
But he grew up at a very different time. And what did songwriters do in the 60s with the Beatles as models? Well, you didn't go to the musical theater.
Yeah, the 60s was the ending of kind of the big musical theater era. Like, Camelot was the last one, and then Fiddler, and then that was it. Yeah.
And it's because if you were going to write popular songs, you would try to become the Beatles or any equivalent. You'd probably become Dylan. You try, and why shouldn't you? That's really good, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's where Randy went. And so we would talk about, he would listen to things like by Cy Coleman, who's a good musician and a good songwriter. And he'd say, I don't really get this style of writing it because it seems to my ears, there's something about it that it's like you're going to write in the style of this instead of writing this. Richard Rodgers was never disingenuous in his writing, but it's easy in writing for theater to write as if you're somebody else. It's easy in a lot of professions to do that. What gets weird is if you're so often become somebody else that you're no longer you. And now sometimes obviously an exception, because in as he's gotten older, he's even more pure about being this, interesting, mining a certain musical theater world in a very unique, smart way. He's that. It's just interesting, and obviously something you and I have talked about a bit.
Yes. So then you worked with Randy Newman. You went out to California. You worked with him. You did a whole bunch of great stuff. You worked with Dez. And then kind of what happened there with him? Because I mean, you did some work at La Jolla, and then all of a sudden you end up back in Stratford somehow.
Well, yeah. So Dez was artistic director at La Jolla for a good while. And that led to me essentially moving out here from New York. And there's obviously various personal things in there as well. And then I just basically started becoming a composer and sound designer, working in all the theaters in this coast. So in San Francisco and in Orange County and in LA and in San Diego and around the country as well. And that really was, and it's saying was because I don't know what the profession's going to be, but so with the development of everything digital in music and sound that's happened, since you were a kid and since I was 30, okay, I was working in theater. So automated sound systems were certainly not there in La Jolla in 1983. I was just talking to a copyist. Um, Everything I did was in pencils back then. Now it's so pretty, right?
It is.
Yeah, I know, and stuff like that. So anyway, so I basically been California based since like the late '80s, depending how you look at it.
Okay.
Des had been flirting with Stratford for a good 10, 15 years because he was a sort of a golden son of Canada.
Yes.
I mean, I think he was first offered artistic directorship late '80s, early '90s. Yeah. I think I may be off by a year or two, but not by that much. Because we would talk about it because I said it'd be nice to be there. Then he finally took it with a few others, as you know, but then it became him in 2008. So, and we'd remain friends and always were in touch and stuff like that. So he asked me to come along. And so at Stratford, over my 5 seasons there, I did Romeo and Juliet and Tempest and Macbeth. I could say Macbeth and
that's fine.
If it's okay, right? And Dangerous Liaisons with Ethan McSweeney, and then 2 things with Plummer, the Tempest and his one-man show, and then
Twelfth Night.
Twelfth Night, yes, and that's
that's a lot to do in 5 seasons.
yeah.
So I mean, just to kind of dive a little bit deeper into this, because you brought us something really interesting. So then, walk us through kind of the timeline of what would happen in a season at Stratford with you, because obviously, Des will come to you and say, "Hey, we're doing Mackers this year. Want you to compose for it." You would show up in Stratford in February, because that's usually when the season would start. Right. Rehearsals anyway. I mean, they'd be doing set work and design work before that, but like you would show up in February-ish, and then kind of walk us through what would happen going up to opening the show.
Right. Well, Des is somewhat unique in this way because some directors aren't particularly interested in it. So how about before I answer that, let's just talk about underscoring for a second.
Yeah.
Because some people say underscoring. Oh, cool. How great. Fantastic. Can't get enough.
I love underscoring.
Right. And some people say, oh, underscoring, you're just manipulating the audience and it's awful. Oh, you terrible man. I can do either. It doesn't, I'm certainly cool with underscoring. I'm certainly cool with not underscoring. It's, whatever we do, we do. It, I'm going to be fine and sleep well that night. It doesn't matter. But I know with Des that to his mind, underscoring just adds another dimension.
Yes.
And rarely do I underscore it. Like I don't necessarily reinforce emotionally something that's rather clear anyway.
Right.
That's a little bit more of what you do in film scoring, and it actually works in film scoring because of the way film works. That you can build up to a romantic moment in ways that are unique to film. In theater, it's a little bit different because theater is alive every night, so you can't be exactly as precise. You can get. In any case, so what Des would do, and it would be in my contract, is I would essentially be at every rehearsal, and I would have a piano and a synthesizer and my computer and probably a drum or two, and basically, at the first day of rehearsal, for the people who didn't know who I was, they said, so Michael kind of just improvises. And I guess I have enough chops to know that my way of improvising, if Des says, do something here underneath this speech, the first thing I might do is just, almost nothing.
Yeah.
In film score, that's called grazing, right? It's just, I'm not really doing anything.
Yeah.
Right. And then sometimes with the synth, you kind of put a tone underneath it. So there's a pedal tone and then I would just take notes and I would not really get in their way because I really wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
And then as we would keep rehearsing and it would become more specific and more rehearsed, I would get, and I started actually making notes in my script about, this is actually, that, and then and that's 2 cues. I'm going to have a strings section that does this kind of thing. And then a bass clarinet will come along and do that in its own cue.
Yeah.
Responding to a line. And that's how you kind of divide up this. And that's how a play like The Tempest ends up having 150 music cues in it. Yeah. Some of those cues are just holding a chord, and some of those cues are another instrument, and some of those cues are just a low tone. And people would just become used to the fact that I was doing that, and in most cases get to the point where they sensed that it was supporting them, right? So rarely did anybody really object, and sometimes they barely heard what I was doing. Like I remember in Macbeth, so sometimes the piano that was with me, it would usually be an upright. It was always an upright, and but I would open up the inside of it and play a lot of I'll do it on this piano, but sounds, that kind of stuff, right? And I would just kind of make notes about what I was doing. So sometimes I did a lot of inside piano and prepared piano kind of stuff. And then, as I say, over the weeks that I was there, it would slowly become notation that I would write and go home and write it out more specifically and all that. I mean, and because it was Dez's style, there'd be a fair amount of underscoring, and that's how and then it'd be underscoring that would kind of hit something for a transition, and usually the transitions were pretty quick. So in fact, ordinarily you might think that that's where you're doing your show is in the transitions, and in many ways you are. But as Ryan noticed, I was in fact doing my show quite a number of other places too.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, some plays have songs, and what's that about? And in this case, Twelfth Night's, almost a musical, depending on what you want to say about it,
I think it's like one I Want song away from being a musical.
Yeah, right. That's exactly.
Song and you're good to go.
That's precisely right, Mackenzie, because at no point does Viola come down stage and says, I'm just a poor girl from a shipwreck. I love this man. Why can't anybody help? She never sings "Can't Help Loving That Man of Mine." She never sings that, right? And if she did, it would be kind of crappy. So, right, it's like, but she doesn't have an "I Want" song. That's right.
Yes.
She doesn't say "All I want is a room somewhere."
Part of your world.
Yeah, right. She does. Instead, and that's what's interesting is his songs tend to be philosophical in the moment and sometimes connected to action, because I can contradict what I just said and say, where the B sucks is an "I want" moment for Ariel.
Yeah.
Kind of, sort of. and Freedom is an I Want song kind of for Caliban.
It is, yeah.
You know, but arguably they're not the lead. So Prospero doesn't have his, you know, whatchamacallit, the thing from Sweeney Todd, you know,
his Epiphany song.
Yeah, he doesn't have his, he doesn't have one of those. He doesn't really need it. It's interesting when you think about that.
Yeah. Okay, so then you compose in the rehearsal room, and then obviously you're getting closer to Tech Week and opening. So when do things start coming together, and like when do you actually have to get into that recording studio to meet that tech deadline to give the actors an actual chance to be on the stage working with the sound bites?
Right. It's a pretty crazy schedule because everybody wants me to be one place. And and that's usually about 3 places that I should be, and I can really only be in one place because by that point the actors are really used to this, you know, funny looking guy sitting in the corner improvising, and then suddenly I'm gone because I have to be recording. So what usually would happen, and actually Stratford was a little bit easier because of the rehearsals. The way rehearsals worked at Stratford is that there's primary and secondary and tertiary rehearsals for the plays that are in rep. Do you know this at all?
Yeah. I know the basic scheduling of what they do, where they stagger things out.
So on a given Tuesday, the Tempest will be a primary day, and anybody you want can be there. But on it's a secondary day, you know, Richard III rehearsing down the block gets everybody they want, and you get who's left over. And there's give or take, right? So my recording sessions would tend to be on secondary days, right? So I was able to work it that way, but there would be very long days because then I have to take what I do with the instruments and mix it. And this I think, excuse me, was somewhat unique when I got to Stratford. Was I tend to stem everything out. Do you know what I mean by that, Mackenzie? I can explain
stemming. Basically like you're writing it out on the music, right? Like
no. Once I've mixed everything and it all sounds okay, and I've added, you know, soft synth stuff and various textures and put reverb on things, and that all I do nowadays with a computer, right? And that's why it is finally all elements of sound design. Right, because it 20 years when I first got to Stratford, none of it would have been in a computer. It all would have been live. But now that we have this way of working, we do what we do. Anyway, then I would bounce out sections of. So, for example, we're going to talk about like the Drown My Book underscoring.
Yes.
That is for 3 violins, 3 cellos. And I believe there was some woodwinds in there. I would.
Looks like there's some woodwinds in there. Just looking at the score.
Yeah, I actually it looks like Utopia there is, but Drama Book, but a better example, Where the Bee Sucks.
Yes.
And again, I'm looking at these scores for the first time in a long time. That was, you know, for strings and woodwinds and a little bit of brass and some percussion and other things, right? I would once I was happy with the mix in my computer, I would then make audio files of the violins, the cellos, the brass, the woodwinds, the percussion, everything separate, including any guide tracks needed for the singer to hear.
Right.
Because usually there would be some if the singer needed the melody being played at certain points, because hearing stuff live is crazy that way. There would be a separate track of that would play in an overhead monitor, right?
Right.
Anyway, so there would be as many as, you know, 6 to 10 tracks that would be mixed live in the room, right? So 12th Night was all that.
Oh yeah.
And so the other long days for me would then be with the sound designer. In one case, it would be Todd Charlton, who's rest in peace, who's gone now. The other case would be Peter McBoyle. Um, we would spend a lot of time mixing it, making sure that whoever needed monitors on stage to hear what they're singing to could hear it well.
Right.
Making sure that it was interestingly balanced in the room, because it's a big, wide stereo picture that you have to kind of set up a couple of stereo mixes for and see what it sounds like when you walk around the room, because the room, it's different everywhere, but you kind of say, well, that's good. You know, you turn it from a negative into a positive and just say good. And in some cases, there would be click tracks that various actors would have to hear, so that they would be in 12th Night when they were playing guitar, they'd be playing guitar live, but the orchestra would come in 8 bars later, so they'd be playing to a click track in an earpiece in their ear. So all those are separate tracks that all go into the big computer. At the time, everything was played out of LCS, which I think stands for Lever Control Systems, I think, which is an audio mixing thing for theater. And it took it would take a while to get all of it together. And there would still be sometimes in tech when we weren't done mixing something. So there would be a piano down at the front of the stage, right behind where you're sitting, where I would go down and play it live until we could catch up with you, you know, that kind of thing. So it's a very complex process.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's a process I don't think people appreciate. Like, I know
they do.
As an audience member, I appreciate when I hear it, because it just, particularly with Shakespeare, like I find when there isn't underscore or isn't good sound design in Shakespeare, it can fall really flat really fast, because I mean, not everybody has the mastery of the text like a Plummer, like a Martha Henry who can really animate that text naturally. And the music just helps, like the composition in the soundscape helps build that world. You're right, it is very cinematic in what it does. Like rewatching The Tempest this week, like it was very cinematic. Like just watching the ending sequence.
Freedom, high day, freedom, freedom, high day,
When you watch the ending where you have the spirits appearing on the little staircases in their black suits, right? Like the fact that you were able to time that with the music, and it felt very cinematic, where they just appear on certain beats. And on stage watching it too, like you get those moments as well, and you are getting a very clear cinematic story, which is why I like underscore in plays, because I think
I think you know it's interesting. I certainly don't mind it. You know, some of my best friends are underscore. You know, but it's interesting. Because I think contemporary audiences who are raised on film, they're kind of used to a musical scenario that is part of it, and if it's well done, it's good. And it's not that you don't need the underscoring; it's sort of like saying, do you want interesting light on you?
Yeah.
Right. Well, Does James Blendett need what I did under him in Utopia? Not really, but you noticed, and Ryan noticed, that it supported him as opposed to these idiots who are laughing at him, who are finally going to be the bad guys, right?
Well, that's the thing about music, is it's not there for the actor. Because once again, particularly in film, you don't hear the music. The music is added after the fact. The music is added for the audience to help direct the audience, because the audience usually a bunch of the time doesn't know the story. Like if I brought my dad in to see The Tempest, I mean, he'll know it because I did it at Stratford Shakespeare School, but he can't remember. He gets it confused with Midsummer all the time. But it's like he won't know that, but the music helps direct his focus, and I think that's the That's underscoring
no,
works best.
And focus, as you know, is one of the most important things that you have to do in theater, because it's not film. So you have to focus the energy of every given moment, and every bit of ammunition you have to do it helps do it.
Yes.
And because I know we'll talk about working with Chris Plummer. The only thing I'll say in this context is I was told that he was going to be a little weird about underscoring, like, are you going to do that? Oh, really? Kind of thing. And I was a bunch of people, because I know I'd heard that they wanted to try more in Caesar and Cleopatra, but it kind of never happened, and life goes on. That was Rick Fox, and I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But The Tempest had a couple of advantages. One is that there are these songs.
Yes.
And he does call for music, and with the help of music, some music's got to show up now,
Yeah.
And then also, I gotta say, he ended up just appreciating that I was kind of, subtly finding my way into moments, and he would watch it with other actors, and so he got to the point of just trusting me. The other thing, since we talked about Richard Rodgers,
yes,
one time at rehearsal I played this. You know that song?
I do.
It's "You Are Too Beautiful."
Yes,
it's
very underrated Richard Rodgers song.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful Rodgers and Hart song. And he looked at me and said, "You are too beautiful." Oh, fantastic! And so we kind of connected, because he's a pianist.
Yes.
So we kind of just connected on that way, to the point where when we did his one-person show, he asked me about it while we were in previews for Tempest. And, and I would see him a lot, right? And he said, "Listen, I'm thinking of doing my one-person show here in 2 years. Would you like to do the music?" And I said, "Well, let me think about it." "Okay, sure." And because he said, there are moments when just having some support means that I don't have to feel like I'm rushing.
Yes.
Because there's something supporting me and taking me through moments. And maybe when we talk about him later, he wrote me a very nice letter complimenting me on that. And the fact that I can play "You Are Too Beautiful." But so, it's, even the tough ones will bend if you can earn their respect and realize that I'm in fact supporting them, not, and I'm actually not dictating emotionally so much as supporting intellectually.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I mean, and the fact that you just put a really good pin on it, where you're like, especially in the moment, you're giving them moments to breathe, because a lot of times when you're just speaking, particularly Shakespeare text, you think dead air could be life and death to you as an actor, because you don't want dead air on stage. But when you can actually give a musical underscore moment where somebody can pause for a moment, and you can just let the underscore of the, say, two violins just bowing quietly as you reflect, well, that just gives that actor that opportunity to breathe and live in this piece, versus being like, I can't give myself that 5 seconds of pause, because it's going to get cut by the director, because the director going, that's not, you're going to lose the audience in that 5 second pause. But if you give them something to cushion that, it works. And you're right, it's totally intellectual, because the brain will, like, as Ryan very pointed out, like, there's no clear red light going, hey, supporting Gonzalo with the underscore here. It's okay, like, mentally you're connecting those subconsciously. It's that intellectual, as you said, that connection that the audience gets to make. But yeah, no, so good. I mean, so speaking of Mr. Plummer, let's segue into your experience, because you've worked with several high-profile artists. I mean, just to list a few: Christopher Plummer, Tom Hanks. We've already talked about Randy Newman. playwright Tom Stoppard. We've talked about Alicia Keys. And then you've worked with some fantastic Broadway actors, two of my personal favorites, Zero Mostel and Alice Ripley. So, I mean, let's just kind of just dive into what it's like working with some of these big profile names, because I'm sure anybody else would be struck walking into a room going, I have to orchestrate for Christopher Plummer. But you've had this plethora of experience here.
It's a little bit of hyperbole to say that I worked with Zero Mostel. I was 18. I played piano for him at a charity cocktail party my freshman year in college back on Long Island. It was in an adolescent way, truly thrilling to be sitting and talking with him, someone who is in many ways an enormous hero for me. Zero the hero, but I didn't really work with him. He sang Richmond, and he did a little. He did some mime things that I accompanied for, and he sang
Forum, probably.
He sang Sunrise Sunset. Yeah. That was that. So there you go. So and if you want to put a link to the little essay I wrote about my day with him,
we will. Yeah. Down here in the YouTube.
That kind of explains it better than how I would tell it now. But it was a great day, and there's a picture, and you're probably showing it. And I
will put a picture right here.
Yes. Yeah, so who's that bearded guy at the piano? I don't know. But Alice is one of my very dear friends. And before Next to Normal, she was out here trying to, do some stuff and get some things going. And we first got to know each other. She was the lead in a kids musical that Des wrote that I music directed. And back in La Jolla, she was living in La Jolla or Poway, San Diego, 80 something, early 90s maybe, I don't remember.
Right. Before Sideshow.
This is before she moved to New York. This is before Tommy. Okay.
Okay.
And so we just became very good friends then, and then sort of remained so. And then I was doing a gig in New York years later after she'd done Sideshow, et cetera, and she just came to see the show and liked the music, and I was there that night. So we just kind of hooked up again very quickly and became, reacquainted our friendship. And I knew her husband, who was her husband at the time, was a drummer. So, one thing led to another. And then when she came out here, she's a singer-songwriter. She likes writing songs, and she's an interesting songwriter. So she said, you're a crazy composer. What do you do when you write this stuff? Because it's so nuts. And I said, and one thing led to another. So if you want to put a link to this, we started writing a music theater piece together that is essentially based on a mass structure. And the piece that became most complete, and we actually premiered it at a salon here in LA, was we did a Kyrie based on the experiences of a Cuban-American artist named Ana Mendieta, who a lot of people actually know of because of how she passed away. She was pretty young, and her work is very earthy. It's her in a tree, naked, surrounded by nature. It's very compellingly about us as living forces in the ground, sort of. That cheapens it a bit, but that's. Yeah. And the man she was married to, Carl Andre, I think his first name was Carl. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. But his work is very mathematical, very, like it's a square here and it's square here and it's square here, and that's that. Thank you very much. Yeah. Interesting. So anyway, and he was so what actually happened, I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. But one night in, I think, 1984. She either fell out of or was pushed from the window of her 35th story apartment in Greenwich Village.
Mm-hmm.
She landed on top of the Waverly Deli, which is 2 blocks from the Public Theater.
Wow.
And she died. Now, he was accused of murder.
Mm-hmm.
The circumstances remain way too complicated for us to speak about.
Yeah.
And he is still around.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't talk about it, but he was not convicted. Now, her work, she made pieces called silhouettas, which are basically, she would put herself into the work, right?
Right.
She would cover herself with like a mask made out of mud, and you would kind of discern her form. It's pretty interesting, compelling stuff that to my mind never quite fulfilled the vision that she clearly was going at, you know?
Right.
So we wrote a motet.
If you push me and I fall, if you push me and I fly, listen, no, I'm not asleep. Hey, listen, mercy, I'm not asleep,
It's we basically wrote a Kyrie, which is mercy. So Kyrie, mercy, Anna M. And it's for, I believe, 8 voices. And it becomes a motet, meaning it's 8-part text simultaneously attacking each other, sort of.
Right.
You know? It's a form of music that was very popular in the 15 and 1600s, and I think it's really hip vocal writing, and I do it all the time. But it's about her, what's going through her mind, sort of, as she's falling 34 floors.
That's such an interesting concept.
And here's what I'll say about the only performance of it. We did it at a LA Composer Salon here in Venice, and she so I just said, I'm not we were sort of interviewed a little bit, but I said, I'm not going to tell anybody what this is, other than it's a motet and it's a Kyrie, and here are all the singers, and ideally there'd be no conductor, but I'm going to sort of conduct from the front row sitting down here, so you don't really see me.
Right.
And I very much like the piece. And so Alice kind of sang the main part. Is she being Anna Mendieta? Not really. She's kind of being
one of the voices.
One of the voices who kind of, everybody becomes her at a certain point. So it's not really the way I would look at it. But it's a very powerful experience and very oddly emotional and spiritual, right? The way masses can be. They question your place in a spiritual way. And when we were done, and you know, it's kind of impressive watching. You know, we had I think about 10 singers finally doing it a cappella. And the last rehearsal of it that morning, Randy couldn't make it to the performance, but the last rehearsal was right here, and Randy was here for that last rehearsal. He wanted to see what we were working on. Isn't that great? So LA's a pretty cool town. Anyway, when we did it, I said, does anybody know what that was? Anybody get what that was? And somebody said, well, somebody's clearly falling from a building, and you know, and is clearly like meeting her death, and this is what's going on. So they got that, and I said, and then somebody finally said, is this about Anna Mendieta? And I went, wow, you win. I mean, it's so. You know, I know when Alice and I talk, which is about once a year, you know, we'd love to find a way to do it and finish the piece, but life is crazy that way. But I love her. I think she's a great talent. I was very proud of Next to Normal. I'm also glad that her voice it was for a while getting a little shaky because of the Next to Normal experience kind of hurt her vocally, and
it's a very tough score to sing. It's a very
and doing it 8 times a week. Nobody does that in opera, you know, and and so she's in really good shape now, and that makes me happy too. So. Tom Hanks. You want
Yeah,
to talk
Tom
about
Hanks. Yeah, let's talk about Mr. Tom Hanks, Mr. like another person connected to Randy Newman via.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So yes, we did a production of Henry IV, parts 1 and 2 in one evening. And Dan Sullivan, who's a great New York director. I mean, that sounds like almost, I mean, that's not exactly the way I would put it. He's a great director, but he is in New York. Was directing it, and this is done by Shakespeare LA, and Tom Hanks was Falstaff. And then they called me and said, "You want to do the music?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know, sure." So now when I got the call about this, and then I talked to Dan, and the main thing Dan said was, instead of brass for all the military stuff, why don't you do it with electric guitar?
That's a cool reinterpretation.
And I said, okay, that's fine. And he said, but it's going to look period, but just put some electric guitar in there. And, it's interesting what electric guitar does as opposed to just synthesizer, because synthesizer can sound a little bit too cliche, whereas a guitar is kind of has more muscle to it in an interesting way.
Yeah.
So the score was, a lot of percussion, and there was some brass, and there was stuff going on. But there was always this kind of reverbed electric guitar, like when troops would show up, and where we did it was outdoors here in LA next to a veteran center. And when they would show up on this little hill behind the stage, there'd be this kind of reverb guitar sound that would happen that just kind of spread around the theater in interesting ways. And it was pretty cool. And it's not like anybody said, "Oh, electric guitar, ooh, what's that?" It was just more, that's the sound of the play. And I established it right at the top of the play, too. So, unfortunately, nothing of that play is filmed except for that one little link when there was one night when somebody fell ill in the audience and Tom came out as Falstaff and basically entertained the audience for about 10 minutes. And it's amazing. He is a genuinely great actor, and boy, does he have chops. And I'll tell you, it is quite something to watch him take direction, because he immediately locks onto what you're saying, immediately says, "Right, got it," and then does it.
Right.
And there's, and now granted, hopefully everybody in the room is, including me as music directing, hopefully we're reasonably smart at this. But everything that I suggested he did. Yeah. There was no bullshit about there. I mean, it was, and as I say all the time, if there's a lesson to really learn from that, it's yes, he is the nicest guy in show business, but also he's just showing up to do the work, and that's the deal. Show up and do the work, and try not to be a jerk, and you're probably going to be okay. And yes, was he a great Falstaff? I mean, I wish there was some talk about us bringing it to Central Park in New York the next summer. That would have been great. We also did both parts together in one evening, and we had to be out by 11:30 every night. And you're really doing a disservice to part 2 when you truncate it that much. And but there's nothing you can do about it. So the experience was, I think, good. The other thing that was great about it was the Shakespeare Center LA is very much connected to the Los Angeles veterans community. And so it was taking place at the West LA Veterans Hospital, I think it's called, which is about 2 miles from here. So it's a very easy commute. And the whole backstage crew was all veterans. They built that set. When you see pictures of it, that's not there anymore. They just built that structure for this production. And it's a play about war. And there's all these people who had been in war. And that really gave it an interesting resonance that the veterans picked up on, and Tom's a very much a supporter of veterans issues. And I try to be too. I have friends in that community. I've never been, but I think I understand it personally because of a good friend of mine. So a woman named Kayla Williams, who I think the world of. Look her up, people.
Can do.
Anyway, so that was, but Tom was great, and yes, you can certainly play that little. I said, would you mind if we recorded you singing the song, and that's there, and that was the opening of our production.
Do nothing but eat and make good cheer.
Do nothing but eat and make good cheer.
And praise God for the merry year.
And praise God for the merry year. When flesh is cheap and females dear, and lusty lads roam there and here. So merrily, and ever amongst, so merrily, so merrily, so merrily, and ever amongst, so merrily. Be merry, my wife has all. Be merry, my wife has all. For women our shoes both short and tall. For women our shoes both short and tall. 'Tis merry all when beards wag all, and welcome merry shrove tide. Do me right, and of thee.
So, and Tom Stopper, do you want me to talk about him?
Sure, let's talk about. I mean, he's another very well-known person that
yes, he is.
Yeah.
You know what? Again, this all gets anecdotal, but I did the American premieres of Indian Ink and Invention of Love in San Francisco. Gary Perloff directed them.
Right.
And I know that there was almost no music in the original, in the British productions.
Right.
So here I show up, and in Invention of Love, we're going to Hades, and then we're back and talking to a bunch of Oxford. I don't remember the play all that well right now, but we're kind of traveling a lot. Yeah. So let's and carries into it. So we're kind of playing around. He was totally into whatever we were doing. He was there to work and there to collaborate with us. And he would go out and buy a Kit Kat bar if he wanted one, and again, just a totally generous spirit. There to do the work.
So let's round out this wonderful section with Mr. Plummer, because we started talking a little bit about him, and then we've kind of gone through the other wonderful list of people who you've had the opportunity to work with. But let's round the section out with Mr. Plummer, who, as of this recording, we lost only want to say a month ago at this point now, like roughly a month and a half ago, recently.
It's probably been closer to 2, actually.
Yeah. It was like started January-ish.
Yeah. And I, the last time I saw him, we did his one-person show at Stratford, and then we remounted it at the Amundsen here in LA. And that would have been maybe 5 years ago, something like that. Well, I've kind of said some of this already, but that I'd heard he'd be reluctant about underscoring, but he finally did get into it. This is what he gave me opening night of Tempest.
Oh wow! And he drew that.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so this is Maestro. So that's not bad. Okay. It must feel wonderful to revive your original Tempest score, which you wrote for the Globe production. How satisfying. It's quite amazing, too, that it hasn't dated in any way after all this time. Is it true, the rumor I'm hearing, that you over-rehearsed the original Goddesses for that night? What did you have in mind, sir? Lots of love anyway. It's a beautiful score, and so is the As You Like It one. That was that summer that I wrote with Justin Ellington. Good bloody luck. See you in Hollywood. Adoringly yours, Chris the Dirty Duck Plummer.
That's beautiful.
And then what you can see here is you see freedom.
Yes. Yeah.
there. Yeah, I'd almost forgotten about this one. Because when I took out some of the music, there it was. But this is framed, as you can see.
Yeah.
And this says, "My dear old Michael R., I'm preparing a one-woman gig, which I, of course, will perform, and look very much for, and want you to do one of your tasteful and imaginative arrangements of 'You Are Too Beautiful.'"
Yeah.
Right. As backing for the show. In any case, however, I have to tell you about what "however" means between him and me. Mm-hmm. The title would have to be changed to "I Am Too Beautiful," as everyone already knows. Seriously, however, you have been fabulous. I can't thank you enough for the magical musical moments you have brought to my little evening. It has made the show absolute, and I am both grateful and in your debt. I envy so much the speed and the ease with which you work. You are an artiste of the highest order. No kidding, baby. Lots of love and thanks, Christopher Robin Plummer.
You know what? That's getting me a little teary-eyed. That is a beautiful letter.
You know, and I haven't read that aloud since he passed away. Mm-hmm. But we really did hit it off. And yes, it's for the one-man show. So what happened? You know, I'm trying to think back. We had a quick meeting in New York where he read the script aloud, and we just kind of talked about it, sitting in Dez's office. It was just sitting around, you know.
Yeah.
And then he said he was going to be, and this is the year that he won the Oscar. So he came out to LA like February, whenever that was.
Yeah,
that year.
Yeah, the Oscars are in February normally.
Right.
Not this year.
Right. Yeah. This year, who the hell knows? But and the Tony Awards, when are they happening? I don't know. So beats me. But anyway, so he came out, and we met at his hotel here, and then I said, "Chris, why don't I record you doing the monologues that we're talking about, so I can have them to play with?" And he said, "Sure." And so he came over. So he sat right over there. Okay, he sat right there.
Wow.
Okay, a little bit of cinematic magic for you. And he recorded the monologues, and then I kind of did a little bit of music for them, and he said, "Yeah, good." And then he said, let's have the first week of rehearsals, you and me working these things up. Because the show was essentially staged, already. Des and he had kind of worked all that out. So the first week of rehearsals in Stratford at the Avant, in the rehearsal room there, were just him and me sitting at a piano with a synthesizer, and him doing the monologues, and me kind of coming up with stuff, and say maybe more of this, less of this, but we were really working together. And
love that.
And every so often I would say to myself, I can't be that much of a schmuck if I'm really doing this with this guy. Yeah. Because you were so aware this is the last of that generation, who I'm sitting with. Yeah. Yes, he is Captain Von Trapp, et cetera, but he's also everything else he's ever done.
Yes.
And boy, does he have chops. I mean, it's so there. Yeah. And like you say, bring your A game and hold on and keep going, right?
Yeah.
And then we did a run through without Des there yet, just him and me and a stage manager. We said, let's just see what we got. We'll just kind of get through it. And when we were done, he said, "Yeah, good, Michael. Am I missing something? Is there any other places where I should go?" And I said, "In fact, I think the Cyrano needs a little something too." Yeah. And he said, "Yeah, you're probably right." And we put that together that day. Perfect. That's who you're working with, if you, and it's, it's just very trusting and very kind. And then since you asked about process, you're, with when we got into tech at the Avon, we were starting to record. I don't remember exactly what, but for a bunch of the rehearsals at the Avon, I was sitting at a piano right below the stage, like we were right next to each other, you know. And there was maybe about 2 minutes where he thought maybe Michael should just be here.
Yeah, give some nice live accompaniment.
Right. And then, but, you know, and then I said, you know, it's a little weird. I mean, who's this funny looking guy? You know, and he said, yeah, you're probably right. You know, but you know, because it was nice to, you know, accompany him live, obviously. But it would have been weird. And so I'm pleased that we didn't go there. But no, he was a great artist. He was really, really smart, and very generous and gracious, always. Yeah.
Love that. Well, I mean, before we end part 1 of this interview, let's kind of let you impart some worldly wisdom upon future composers and sound designers. Like, what's the best or biggest lesson you think that these young up-and-coming composers, musicians, sound designers should kind of take with them to kind of get the opportunities like you've had, where you've been able to work with, as you said, Plummer, Hanks, Alicia Keys, Alice Ripley, Randy Newman. Like you've obviously done something right over all these years. You must have done something good, as Plummer says in Sound of Music.
I must have done something good. I did hear him talk about Sound of Music, by the way, and you know, as you probably know, his basic attitude at the time was arrogant, like during the filming. You know, and he himself admitted that he was probably just a real jerk. And above it all during the filming. But I think what I know of him is his wife, Elaine, who was really wonderful. Basically, by the time he was with her, basically said, you got to stop drinking. Because he was a big drinker. And clean up your act. And maybe we got a shot here, you know? And he clearly did. And when you read his biography, that's clearly that, you know, he became like understanding, you know, don't be an asshole. Don't be a jerk, you know, and so he recognizes the arrogance of the young man who was drinking too much on the set of The Sound of Music, who nonetheless is a really good actor, clearly, you know, and what the story that he would tell is that by the time he watched Sound of Music again, like at a festival or something, like years and years later, right? You know, 25, 30 years later, and said, you know, it's not bad, and Julie's great. That, you know, and when you watch the movie, you know, it's not bad, and Julie's great.
She is the standout star for the reason of that movie.
You know, you really don't need much more than that. It's not bad, and Julie's great. Well,
yes.
You know what I mean? Now, so what words of wisdom can I give them? Quoting Fiddler on the Roof. God help us. I think there are several things, and I don't know if I would have talked about this so much 20 years ago, but I do now. You're in a, but I think you see it reflected in my work too. We're talking about opera and things. We're in a profession that if you study composition, what you're studying is how to answer the question, what does your music sound like? And you answer that question bit by bit, measure by measure, over a lifetime. But basically, like it or not, you're doing what Beethoven did for a living. So deal with it, right? And that's crazy. Now, if you decide to work in theater or work in film, very often you're going to be in a position where you're composing music for somebody else's approval. And when you study music and study composition, that's not what's in the room. You're studying to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
Right? And what does counterpoint mean to you? What do notes mean? What does sonority mean to you? And when you look at the most unique composers in your history, they're people who really didn't do it for anybody's approval. They just did it because they had to do it.
Yeah.
When I talk about Conlon Noncaro, who I don't imagine you know of.
No.
That's a whole nother thing, and you can watch my salon about him.
Okay.
Go to the link.
Link in the bio.
No, I mean, I talk about his music a lot in a sentence because he decided, because of his unhappiness with the American response to the Abraham Lincoln Brigade that fought against fascism in Spain, he took a very modest inheritance and moved to Mexico and composed over a period of 30 years or so 44 etudes for the player piano. That is some of the most revolutionary music and certainly the most unique music written by an American, to my mind. Unique, advisedly, the word I'm using, in the second half of the 20th century. He didn't listen to what a director told him to do.
Yeah.
He didn't listen to a director who said, why, that music's too dissonant. I don't, So what I say to people who are in this profession is you have to sort of find your way to do two things. And I've been very lucky about this. I've gotten to the point where in between gigs, I managed to keep composing.
Right.
And nobody's really telling me what to do. And so I have written piano sonatas and I have written an opera that's online. And that's where I put my most personal, my most direct expression of me.
Yeah.
And that means that when somebody asks me to underscore, one of two things might happen. If, and more often than not with Des, he knew what I sounded like, so he would encourage that, maybe not the most thorny, difficult side, but the complicated sound design side, yes. Yeah. In fact, in The Tempest, with the mask,
yes,
we weren't sure what to do with it, and I actually did a setting of a lot of it, knowing we were going to cut a lot of it.
Yeah.
Because as he said, I was writing sort of vaguely Handelian music. Yeah. And he said, yeah, let me think about it. And I said, yeah, but this isn't really what I sound like. And he said, right, that's not you.
Yeah.
And I said, but I kind of don't know where else to go with it, given what the language is saying and given how expansive it is. And we finally trimmed it way down to an essence, right?
Right.
And I think successfully. And that music does sound like me, right?
Yes. Yeah.
He knew that. I knew that. So I think as opposed to it's very easy in this profession to write a 7-second cue and have the director ask you to cut 2 seconds from it, which is in its own way insane.
Yeah.
Even if it's necessary, it's totally against what you're in fact studying when you're studying composition, which is how can I write something that's 35 minutes long? Wouldn't it be cool if I did write something that's 35 minutes long that has one idea in it that I expand?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? That's what you study.
Yeah.
And you don't have some other guy saying, you need to cut 4 seconds from that so it's only, Now, I can deal with that. But what makes me okay with dealing with that is this is not the only thing I do.
Right.
And it may not bother you when you're 20 because you're figuring it out and you're working it out and you're doing what you do.
Yeah.
Although a lot of young sound designer composers, it does bother them. They don't know how to deal with it. And what I've tried to tell them is you need to find the right compositional outlets that are for you and you alone, and you're the only criterion.
Yeah.
Where you say, this is what I'm about, and that will make your work in collaborative art forms feel good. And if it's a bad gig, you can toss it off and not worry about it. And if it's a good gig, they're probably going to ask you to be a bit more you because you're more comfortable developing that. If all you ever do for your entire 40-year career is write music to other people's specs, that just gets weird.
Yeah.
You know, and a little bit unhealthy, and it can encourage the sort of cynicism that's very easy to have in show business of, you know, well, you know what that is. You know, you kind of toss people off in a strange way.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that I've done that masterfully. I don't have a clue what I've done, but I can finally say that no matter, you know, what I always quote is that, do you know who James Cain was? He wrote Postman Always Rings Twice and Double Indemnity, the original novels.
Yes.
And he was asked just before he passed away, he was asked by a biographer, what do you think about what Hollywood did with your books? And he said, they didn't do anything to my books. They're right there.
Yep.
And I think you have to find a way in a collaborative art form to hold on to your own in some way, so that you're not dealing with other people's opinions more than you have to, more than it's part of the gig. I love the collaboration of theater. I think it's great, but you need to find a way to hold on to your own, and that might, if you can do that in a healthy way, it might in fact make you more generous.
Yeah.
You know, so I hope that's a reasonable thing to say.
I think that's a great bit of wisdom there that you have imparted. That is universal to not just composers, because there's a lot of artists who do the big blockbuster work and then they lose the chance, or they don't push themselves to do the other things that maybe give them that creative juice to do a bigger project. That's why you have all those great directors doing, okay, I'll go do a big blockbuster, but then in return, my next movie is going to be an indie short film that I really want to tell the story for. And you need to find that balance in life.
What's interesting about the pandemic is, you know, all of us I've been watching movies on this thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is my TV.
Yeah.
Now I have a much bigger one right over there, but I don't watch it.
You don't need it.
It's really weird. But I'm certainly watching independent work there a lot. And it's really interesting, you know, how people, again, you if you find a way to make your vision work, and also, you know, you know, what's the biggest thing that I learned from working with somebody like Randy Newman? Yes, Randy is a very successful film scoring fellow, and his career took an interesting, I don't want to say resurgence, but just, another audience found him with all the Pixar stuff, right?
Yes.
Which started in the mid 90s and is,
You Got a Friend in Me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, and what's been weird is that, you know, when people see him in concert and they bring children and he can't quite do some of his more complicated portraits of America in his songs, you know, and all that. But I know that he's delighted to do the film scoring, and it's all fine, and it's all good, and it's all good, and it's all okay.
Yeah.
But also then he says, I'm going to just write some songs now, and not think about all this other nonsense.
Yeah.
You know, and if he didn't do that, you know, so you know, and again, because he's such and what I'm very, maybe this is a good last thing to say. You know, I have the feeling the last film he's probably going to score, just given the way the business is going and everything. But he did Marriage Story, this film with Oh gosh, you know,
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver.
Right, and he did the score.
Okay.
And it's a really good, interesting, odd score.
It is.
It doesn't feel like natural film scoring. It feels slightly an object a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was very proud that he did that, because I know when you're doing cartoon film scores, you're if Buzz Lightyear is flying and then falling down steps, your score has to do exactly that. You can't be ironic about it.
Yeah, it's Looney Tuny. The music
you
has
have to go
illustrate the action.
You do it, and that's a lot of bassoon notes, and you got to write all them all, right? Okay. Yeah. And Randy's an ironist and an iconoclastic artist, who is very sophisticated and very, very smart, and certainly sees the irony in human behavior.
Yeah.
And so I'm just very glad that the film that most recently got in the most attention was one that clearly is showing how complicated we are. Yeah. And that is closer to who he is as a thinker, as a musical thinker. And that's what it is. You have to find a way to be the artist you intend to be. And sometimes that means not paying attention to anybody else for a month or two.
Yeah.
And find a way to do that. So
love that.
There you go.
Love that. Well, everybody, thank you so much for watching part 1 of this interview. We will see you in part 2, where we are going to get more into the compositional side of Michael, your work, and kind of breaking down compositionally what you do, because there's a lot of fun things that you've done in there that people may not have realized just listening to it. But we're going to dive into that.
And look at all these keyboards. That's really impressive, isn't it?
I know, right?
How do I play this one? Is it just here for show? I don't know.
Tune into part 2 and find out. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.